Alright, I'm going to show you a pretty cool trick here to find distance between points without having to graph them on the coordinate plane. Really cool stuff here. So this first example shows that we've got -2, 3, so that shows this one, we've got -2, up 3, and then this one is 4, 3, so it's to the right 4, up 3, so then when we connect the line, we can see it, and so graphing this, I can easily count how long this line is. I can see by counting the squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so this line segment is 6, but I don't want to have to graph these points on a coordinate plane every time I want to know how far these points are from one another. So I'm going to show you a cool trick in order to figure out the distance between points without even having to graph them. So if you want to fill in your blanks here, I'm going to talk through this first example. So if you look at these points, now it doesn't matter which quadrants, but if you notice they're in different quadrants. These happen to be in quadrant 2 and 1, but it doesn't matter. But the tip is when points are in different quadrants, you add the absolute values to find the distance between the points. Now let me point out what I mean by this. I have an example here, but let's look at this one graphed up here. So these 2 points are in different quadrants. I can tell because this one has a negative x and a positive y, and this one has a positive x and a positive y, so those can't be in the same quadrant. So then I'm not looking at what's the same. The 3 and the 3 just tell me that they're both up the same distance. That doesn't help me. But if I look at the -2 and the 4, that is what shows how far these 2 points are from one another. So I'm not going to take -2 plus the 4 because that -2 is really showing me that it's 2 to the left of the y-axis, and so I don't really want to use -2. I really want to use its absolute value, saying that that it's 2 away from the y-axis. So that's what I mean by adding the absolute value. So if I take 2, so the absolute value of -2 is 2, plus the absolute value of 4, which is just 4, 2 plus 4 gives me the length of that line, right? So the absolute value of that -2 was this section, and the absolute value of that 4 was this section. So if I add those two together, I end up with the whole line segment, which is 6 units. Those points are 6 units apart. Here's another example without even having to graph them. So if I look, here's one point, that's 3, 5, and another point, 3, -7, I can tell those are in different quadrants because this is positive, positive, this is positive, negative. If I look at the absolute value of the numbers that are different, so the 5 and -7, those absolute values are going to be 5 and 7. And since they're in different quadrants, I'm going to add those absolute values. 5 plus 7 equals 12, so the distance between those points is 12. Pretty neat. Don't even have to graph it. I can tell how far those points are from one another by using my little trick here. Now, what if the points end up in the same quadrant, like example 2 here? So these 2 points, and again, it doesn't matter which quadrant, but these 2 points happen to end up in the same quadrant. Well, if I look at those points, I can see they're in the same quadrant because this is negative, 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 so they're going to end up both in quadrant 3. And if I look and I count the line segment, it ends up being 1, 2, 3, 4 units. But look at my different numbers here. I'm not going to add the absolute value of -2 and -6 because that would give me a line segment of 8, and that's too big. So a nice trick I remember is if points are in the same quadrant, you subtract. Same, subtract, SS. That can kind of help you. And look here, different, add. They've got the D's. So that can kind of help you remember the trick. So when points are in the same quadrant, you subtract the absolute values to find the distance between the points. So like this, I'm going to take the absolute value of -2 and -6, and if I do 6 minus 2, I end up with the 4 here. And so it's kind of like finding the difference, right? So this point is 2 away from the x-axis. This one's 6 away from the x-axis. And so I just find the difference between those two to see what I have left to find the line segment. Let me talk through this example real quick. Here's an example of 2 points in the same quadrant, positive, negative. They're both going to be in quadrant 4. If I take the absolute value of -5, -7, because remember I care about what's different, which would be 5 and 7, I subtract those, so 7 minus 5 equals 2, so the distance between these points is 2. I hope those tricks help you figure out the distance between points without having to graph them on a coordinate plane. So use these tips to help you with the next step, which are the distance between points task cards. Good luck!